This is what the House of Commons could look like if votes cast in the 2024 election were directly translated into seats. But this is how it actually looks. So why doesn't it look like the first example?
Well, in the UK, we use a voting system called first past the post.
We did it!
Under first past the post, the winner takes all. Someone could win a seat even if they get just one more vote than another candidate. This means the winning party can form a government even if most people didn't vote for them. The Conservatives have been in power for 14 years, even though they often win with less than 40% of the vote, meaning more than 60% of voters didn't want them.
And in 2024, first past the post has allowed Labour to win almost 64% of the seats in Parliament, with less than 34% of the vote. If you look at the Green Party, they got just under 7% of the vote, but less than 1% of the seats. And for Reform, the gap's even bigger. They won more than 14% of votes. That's over 4 million people. But they also got less than 1% of the seats.
Some people support first past the post. They say it produces more stable governments that can better stick to their manifestos. That's because it's easier for one party to get more than half the seats in Parliament, so they don't have to go into coalition with smaller parties. But others say it's not fair because it doesn't actually represent how the people vote.
If you look at countries that have either first past the post or similar systems to that, like the 2 rounds of voting they have in France, for example, you're quite often seeing the majority of people saying they're not satisfied with how democracy is working. Whereas if you then look at lots of other countries in Europe that have proportional representation systems of various forms, the scores tend to be much higher. So in countries like Denmark and Switzerland, you have very, very high satisfaction with how the system is working.
That's why some campaigners want proportional representation, or PR.
The Green Party has always supported a fairer voting system because it's about what's right for the voter, what's right for democracy.
But your party does stand to gain a lot from this, so what do you say to people who are saying that you just want this because it's in your self-interest?
This isn't about what works for individual parties. This is about what's good for voters, for every vote counting equally. There's evidence that under a proportional voting system, not only do parties work in a more collaborative way and treat every voter equally, but they're more likely to adopt progressive policies. They're more likely to be stronger on the environment, on public services, for example. And that's because they're forced to work in a way where they listen to different views.
There are loads of different versions of PR, some more directly proportional than others. Some parts of the UK already use PR systems, like in Northern Ireland, where assembly members are elected through the single transferable vote, or STV model. And in other parts of Europe, PR systems are really common. They produce multiple winners, which means smaller parties have a better shot of not just getting seats, but also getting into government, which is why you see a lot more coalitions on the continent. The STV system allows voters to rank candidates in order of preference. So if voters' first choice doesn't win, their second and third preferences can be taken into account. So in theory, it means fewer wasted votes. But what are the downsides of coalition governments?
What tends to happen over time is that society becomes more and more fragmented by the overproliferation of parties, and it becomes harder and harder to form stable governing coalitions. And so what happens is people are satisfied by this idea that you have more choice. You can actually vote for someone who agrees with you. The menu of choices becomes very large, but no matter what you order on that menu, they serve you chicken nuggets every time. In Germany, the Green Party campaigned continuously on environmentalism. And then when it had an opportunity to get into coalition, it rode back on a lot of those environmental commitments.
The Green Party told me that it's more democratic to have a PR system.
There are lots of different ways to think about what democracy means. And I think it's important for voters to not just think which party agrees with me morally or individually, but which party can speak to a broad cross-section of the public, can really govern the country in a way that will be stable and durable across time. And I think that it's not anti-democratic.
So how does the UK actually feel about our voting system? And even if people do want change, would it happen anytime soon?
When you then ask people what are the most pressing issues they're thinking about at this election, for example, things like electoral reform are way, 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 way down the list. So that we're not just talking sort of outside the top 5, they're not even in the top 10 things people are thinking about.
So if we had PR in the UK, the House of Commons would look like this, right? Well, not quite. As we've heard, voters would likely choose their leaders differently under a different voting system. Tactical voting wouldn't be so much of a thing, and parties themselves would try to appeal to voters in different ways. And this picture would change depending on what type of PR was used, with some systems being more directly proportional than others.
So the only way to really find out would be to give it a go, but that doesn't look very likely anytime soon.